Greetings, Uncle Travelling Matt here, and I'm reporting back on my second day in Bulgaria. So, when I last spoke to you, I was driving towards Trnovo. Got there. When I got there, Alex wasn't there, and I couldn't get into the accommodation, and it was a real pain to park. So I was a bit stressed out, but found a nearby pub, which actually turned out they owned the accommodation, so they got me in, and then I chilled out a bit with beer and waited for Alex to arrive. Lovely setting, perched on the edge of the side of the hill, so great views across a deserted church and then the city, really nice. And it was great to catch up with Alex again, and had a nice meal of rabbit with mushrooms, and had a few beers, had a chat with some locals. It's nice to use the language again. And that was that. And the accommodation I'm in, actually, just going to show you. This is like the kind of the main area. It is like an old Ottoman era house. It's quite nice. They call them National Revival houses here, but they're like you get across the Ottoman Empire. Really pleasant. So good accommodation. Alex always picks good accommodation. I'll give him that. Far better than the one I picked the night before, which was a complete and utter dump, very cheap, but it had the weirdest thing with wallpaper. It was like there was just like scraps of wallpaper stuck on the walls, and you might think that they'd just done it because they'd run out of wallpaper, but there did seem to be some design to it, but whoever did it, really clearly. Anyway, yes, I digress. So today, woke up about 9:30, went to a coffee shop for breakfast, and then we got in the car and we drove out to Troyan Monastery, which is one of the main monasteries in Bulgaria. And as I said, we got the car so we can see some monasteries, really. On the way, stopped at a place. It was like a memorial to some battle or something, place called Novoselo, and it seemed to be a memorial to World War One and one of the Balkan Wars before it. There was a quote from Stoyanov, who was one of the prime ministers at the time, and but the guns that they had there looked like World War II guns. But yeah, it was a very overgrown monument. I think back in the day, in the communist time, it would have been kept really nicely, but it was all overgrown. But I don't quite know what that was. So Novoselo, I'm going to look that one up. But anyway, then went to Troyan Monastery. Say one of the big three monasteries in Bulgaria, along with Rila and Bachkovo, both of which I hope to go to. They have a sort of independence all of their own, and it was a wonderful place. Actually, really, really picturesque, gorgeous setting, and like gorgeous buildings all around it. And the church in the middle, a bit of a disappointment. It was an 18th century church, so the church wasn't that old. Covered in frescoes, but it was under repair, so the main kind of nave you couldn't really see that much because there was scaffolding there, but the ones that hadn't been renovated were really like damaged really bad. You can see why they were repainting everything, but of course yeah, so it didn't quite have the atmosphere of, for example, the painted churches that we saw in Trodos, but it was still an atmospheric place, and there was a very friendly priest there we had a little bit of a chat with. Then had a wander around. There was a museum, and in the museum there's a room where Vasilevsky stayed. Now Vasilevsky, if you've never heard of him, he's like the national hero. He's sometimes called the Apostle of Freedom, and there's a bit of a cult of personality around old Vasilevsky. Started, of course, in the time when he was a hero, but it was also kept up by the communists. Because although it was a communist regime, they were a very nationalistic communist regime, so they kind of co-opted all the heroes from the 1870s when Bulgarians had their fight for independence. And one of the reasons why they managed to do that was they were very, very close with the Russians, and it was the Russians who fought for Bulgarian independence back in the 1870s. So the Bulgarians were occupied by the Ottoman Turks, and Russian army came in along with some Romanians and the local Bulgarians to free Bulgaria, and a lot of the battles were here in this area, in and around Veliko Trnovo, which is seen as the heart of the nation. And So the communists, of course, very, very close to the Soviet Union. At one point, Tadeusz Zhivkov applied to become part of the Soviet Union, was rejected, but they were therefore stressing their similarities with friendship with Russia, with the fact that the Russians liberated them, in the 1870s. Interestingly, of course, now the country is a bit torn because at the moment Russia is at war in Ukraine. They are basically fighting for territories Novorossiya, which they believe were historically part of Russia. Novorossiya means New Russia. But the Ukrainians claim to be theirs. International law is on the side of the Ukrainians, it should be noted. But a lot of the population speaks Russian. So the Bulgarians seem to be a bit torn down the middle. Some are supporting Ukraine. I think the government supports Ukraine. So when I was in the archaeological museum, there was a notice saying Ukrainian visitors can enter free. There does seem to be some pro-Ukraine support, but there are also a lot of pro-Russian support because some Bulgarians would see the status of the Russian-speaking people in eastern Ukraine, in the Donbass, as being a bit like the Bulgarians who were freed from Turkish occupation by the Russians in the 1870s, and they would see that the similarity with that. Other people would see parallels with the Ukrainians fighting for their independence off a bigger imperialistic foe, the Russians. So it can work both ways, and here it does. So that's quite interesting. And Troyan Monastery, beautiful, absolutely gorgeous monastery, one of my favourites. Had a look. There was a museum of icons and stuff. The icons seem to be a bit chubbier in terms of the faces than the Greek ones we saw. Afterwards, we went out, and it's meant to be quite famous for the rakia, which is the brandy that the Bulgarians drink a lot of. So we had a little bit of a taste of some different rakias, and we bought a bottle to drink later on the balcony. And so that was that. Then we drove onwards to a place called Bozhentsi, which is this pretty village, basically, of traditional houses. Now, I'd actually been to Bozhentsi before because when I lived in Bulgaria, we went on a school trip, and but I didn't really have a very successful visit because the night before I got very drunk with some other people, including one of the other teachers and a girl who was coming to speak English, to teach English there, and her boyfriend, and then also my friend, bizarrely, was over from Northern Ireland on holiday, and she came on our school trip as well. So we all got very drunk, and I just had a horrendous hangover. And I remember walking to the village main square, going, "Yeah, that's pretty," and then sitting in a one of the first houses, or outside one of the first houses, nursing my hangover, drinking a Coke and a coffee. So this time I properly explored Bozhentsi, and it was really pretty, but it was all a bit toy town as well, fake in that way. Interesting, I thought it would make a brilliant setting for a Bulgarian version of The Prisoner. So any TV directors out there, you heard it here first. Let's make a Bulgarian version of The Prisoner, but set it in Bozhentsi. So there we are. And yet we had a wander around, climbed up to the church. It all was really pretty, but very hot, so it was quite sweaty afterwards. And then our final stop of the day, we went to Dryanovo Monastery. And and that one was not a particularly remarkable monastery. It was, the buildings weren't anything special. Apparently, it had a role to play in the War of Independence, and there was a big War of Independence monument from the communist era at the road where the road forked off. And that was huge. That was pretty impressive. We stopped for that. And then there was also a memorial within the monastery grounds for people who died. And so there was that. What was nice is when we were in the monastery, there was a service going on with two priests. And so it was quite atmospheric. But as far as architecturally and artistically, it wasn't a great monastery, but the setting was incredible. And that was it. Now we'll come back to Dryanovo, and we're going to have a meal here tonight. Other things that are worth mentioning: had a fantastic lunch, late lunch in Troyan, or near Troyan, and it was it was a dish of pork, beans, and nettles, and that was very, very good. Excellent. Just mechana by the road that we stopped at. On the way back, we saw a pretty impressive war memorial. I quite like stopping and taking photos of communist memorials, and there was a pretty impressive one in the name of a village. I forget it, but I will put it in the subtitles at the bottom of the video. And this village seemed to be very patriotic because they all had national flags all the way along the road, and then a brand new monument to enter the village when they came in, which must have cost quite a bit. So yeah, and I hadn't seen anything like that in any other villages, so I don't know what was special about this one. But that's that. It's just been great meeting Alex again. It's been great driving around the car, getting off the beaten track. As before, something old and something new. So there we are. That's it from me, Uncle Travelling Matt, saying keep travelling, and I'll see you again tomorrow.